So through these days, we have moved from the Nordics and Europe to Africa and the Middle East, around to Asia, and we're landing in the Americas. You've already heard from one of the US speakers, but now it's time for Latin America. This is a booming fintech region, and we're really excited to hear what happens there and what's really going on. We have the pleasure to listen to the managing partner at the Latin American Investment Office, IDC, and the co-founder of IDC Ventures. Welcome, Michael Buhlmann.
Thank you very much, Sarah. It's a pleasure to be here. I hope I'm going through loud and clear.
You sound perfect.
Fantastic. Yeah, my name is Michael. I am part of the Latin America Family Office, IDC, but I'm also the managing partner of IDC Ventures and part of the founding team behind it. IDC Ventures is actually our third tech fund, but it's the first one in Europe. We have founded the fund with a group of significant Latin American investors, along with a group of selected Danish investors. And we have founded the fund actually to build a bridge between the two continents. In this presentation, I'm going to give you the arguments and behind that and the logic behind it, what we see. But we are it's a long-term project where we feel strongly that it's necessary to build a bridge and tight relations between investors, founders on the two continents. And apart from only doing investments, it's also a bridge to exchange people, ideas, developments, and so forth. Next slide, please. Before going into Latin America, I just want to give a few words as to why IDC Ventures is so focused on fintech. We are firm believers in fintech going directly to consumers, eliminating the intermediaries and using existing infrastructure with OTT, over-the-top solutions, and mobile-first thinking. Further to this, we see that fintech has proven or is proving its worth in the public markets. We see today that PayPal in the US is the third largest bank. Also during the COVID, it was interesting to see that fintechs actually had quite a resilience to the crisis. It took 3 weeks for the fintechs to get back on track. And actually, at this point, we are well above the valuation levels before the COVID. So there's a great resilience, and the fintechs have proven their worth in the markets. Furthermore, we also see that there's a large amount of funding going in to the fintech world over the past years, making it a really vibrant market. And combined with a large number of IPOs lately, this is really, truly an interesting place to be and an asset class that we think we have to dominate. Next slide, please. Now, turning to Latin America in this context, why is it that we feel that Latin America is interesting? Latin America is an economic bloc with a strong growth. It has had growth rates far above the United States and the US for the past 10 years. It has also developed quite a lot. It's now in the middle income countries in the UN surveys. And this means that there's an increased spending capacity on the continent. Although many of the countries still on the lower end in the middle income, still the spending capacity in the countries has increased a lot. It's a 650 million people market. 2/3 of them speaking Spanish, 1/3 roughly speaking Portuguese, but they all have a similar culture. So it's like, it's not one market, but it's one continent, very similar in language, very similar in culture. Looking at the enablers for technology, there's a high mobile and internet penetration as well on the continent. This is paving the way for B2B and B2C tech adoption and penetration, which is far higher than one could expect. In terms of fintech, there's a low degree of banking penetration in general. And that's a huge opportunity for fintechs and a huge opportunity for the financial sector, which I'm going to dive into at later on in the presentation. And then we're seeing a growing ecosystem of tech companies in general, but in fintechs in particular. In 2018, there was more than 1,100 tech startups registered on the continent. Next slide, please. For fintech, the large proportion of financially underserved people, plus the mobile and internet penetration, spells the opportunity for a tech-driven financial solution provider which can capture users and high level of transactions using automation, using fintechs with low transaction cost combined to it. When the solutions are available on the continent, it's pretty interesting to see the graphic on the far right in terms of adoption of these solutions. We can see that the adoption rate of the consumer adoption rate on fintech solutions is pretty high. It's up to 76 when we talk to fintech. This is a tremendous opportunity. Traditional banks do not capture these segments. As they focus on, they usually focus on the upper half of the demographic pyramid, and they do not have this tech focus and mindset. So it's a market left for new incumbents, for new competitors, for new banks. Next slide, please. Speaking of the financial sector in general, Latin America is also extremely interesting. It has been one of the most profitable and most fast-growing financial sectors in the world, and the banking region is really accelerating. Still, it's dominated by the major countries, Brazil, Mexico, and Chile. But we see the growth also in the smaller countries, with only a few exceptions, like Venezuela and Cuba and so forth. But in general, the whole continent is profiting from a strong growth, which pre-COVID was expected to be around 10%. Next slide, please. If we're turning into tech and how is tech developing in Latin America, this is a pretty interesting picture where we see like a modest start back in 10 years ago in 2010, 2011. But since 2017, something has really happened. We've seen a spike in deals and financing flowing in to the region. It has accelerated its growth, and it's been driven mainly by the development of the tech sector and the startup ecosystem, and an increased focus and interest from both local, regional, and international investors. Over the past years, international investors like SoftBank has increased their focus on tech and investments in the region. We believe that this trend will continue as the tech environment continues to evolve and produce unicorns and world-known tech companies. Next slide, please. Something is really happening in this continent. Brazil came out in the third place in terms of number of unicorns being produced in 2019. Something is really cooking on the continent. A number of major tech companies are rising, especially in Brazil, Mexico, and Chile. But it's not only Brazil, Mexico, and Chile. It's also the smaller countries producing a large number of tech companies today. It's pretty interesting, actually, because I just listened to the closing of the prior speaker from the US. She was talking about support from government support or support programs for innovation, startup environments like that, like we have here in Scandinavia. We have to bear in mind that this is not existing in Latin America. So all of these tech companies, they're actually being produced by themselves on hardcore market conditions and have to survive by their own means with the funding they're able to raise and the results they're able to produce. But nevertheless, we see a really strong region here, and again, Brazil came out a third. For this setting where we are talking about fintech, to look at the chart in the far left corner, where we see what is cooking in the different sectors. And fintech is actually 1/3 of all of the startups being produced here in the continent. So fintech has an extreme importance in that environment today. But again, I think the main thing here is actually that LATAM is really on the map and is here to stay. And it's an early start, so we can only look forward to see what is happening over the next 3 to 5 years. If we dive a bit further into, next slide, please. If we dive a bit further into fintech on the continent, it is interesting to see again that since 2013, we almost have a 50x on the money inflow to the sector. Again, it's accelerated during the recent years, 2016 to 2017. But there's been produced a number of major unicorns out of the continent. Probably all of you know Nubank, PagSeguro, e-banks, and so forth. But it's not only those. There's a number of significant fintechs on the continent. And it's not only the big three, Brazil, Mexico, and Chile, producing them. We also see fintechs coming out of the smaller countries. I would like to just briefly touch on a fintech coming out of Guatemala, Blue Kite, which were actually sold to Zoom out of San Francisco. Zoom later became part of it was IPO'd, and then it was absorbed by PayPal. But it's pretty interesting to see that such a small country like Guatemala was able to build a tech company interesting enough for Zoom actually to acquire it, and later for Zoom to put like 2/3 of their entire staff in that country in the Latin American continent. That actually proves that it's not only the big countries producing these interesting companies, but it's also the smaller companies. And it also proves that we have a growing population of tech savvy and tech knowledgeable people on the continent. It has a lot of positive impact on the continent as well. I mean, one thing is having the geniuses sitting in San Francisco and the like, working on these tech companies, but actually keeping that legacy down in South America has a tremendous social impact in terms of producing a tech cluster in different countries where you have new knowledge, access to the new economy on a continent which has notoriously been known to be behind on all the development parameters. But it's really interesting to see this. It is also a great opportunity for Scandi investors, investors from Scandinavia, and from founders of fintech companies up here. Many of the things that we need on the Latin American continent exist or partially exist up here. And as you can see on some of the valuations we have on the slide, it's also for an investor an extremely interesting place to look at, because we can produce some pretty good returns and some pretty good exits on the investments that we make here. But again, fintech is one of the important, really important sectors within tech, and we believe that this will continue in the years going ahead. Let's move to the next slide, please. Now, I've kind of built an argument around why we look at fintech in general from a global perspective, why we look at Latin America, why we look at tech in Latin America, and also why we look at fintech. I've chosen to bring in 3 examples of what is cooking, or exactly what is on my radar, on my desk these days. I've brought in 3 examples which are in different stages. One is Vana, a Guatemalan fintech, which is in a seed stage. I brought in Usigo, which is actually an insurtech converting into a fintech, present in Mexico, Guatemala, and the Dominican Republic. They're in a Series A stage. And I brought in a jewel, which we have in Latin America, Recoga Pay, which is actually at a pretty advanced stage in a Series C. With these three examples, I would like to give you an idea what is cooking recently, what is on the radar for me, and what is happening here. If we could move to the next slide, please. Vana is an interesting company. It's a mobile-first microloan facilitator. And it's kind of disrupting, I won't say disrupting, or at least expanding the microfinance sector in Guatemala. Normal microfinance institutions, they have to collect 120 data points on the person physically. They have to go see the house where they live and so forth. It's a long process in terms of time, and it's also a costly process in terms of collecting that data and processing that data. Vana has actually produced this mobile-first platform where you enter your request. It takes around 10 minutes to do that. The response to your request is processed in less than a minute, so you know it. And you can go get your money in less than 24 hours in one of the more than 2,000 outlets that we have associated with Vana. It's interesting because that platform is really built on the mobile behavior and building behavioral models that can predict the creditworthiness of the applicant on the spot. A number of visuals, a number of content algorithms are running behind the application when you do it, and you can actually, with a pretty precise measure, predict whether this is an eligible person or not for these credits. So far, this company has produced 16,000 loans with a 90%, roughly 90% payback rate going from January to July this year. It has been poor, the payback rate earlier, because we're trying out, but it's pretty high now. And interesting that it's a pretty sticky model. 86% of the people getting the first loan, they're going into the second, third, and fourth loan. And the default rate is actually falling for every loan you're getting into. So they're getting these extremely agile loans. They're small, between $25 and $250. We can go further, but this is the segment. They now have to prove scalability, but this is something that I think is revolutionizing microfinance in Latin America. It's now based in Guatemala, but it has a potential for Latin America in general. Next slide, please. Going to Seagull. This is a Series A, as I said, company. It's been in the market longer, operating in Mexico, Guatemala, and the Dominican Republic. It is a digital platform for health claims processing. It has fully integrated the whole claims processing process from patient diagnostics, treatment, to the public or private insurer of the health policy. This provides massive efficiency gains in the whole system, hence cutting the cost of the processing, but also creating an extreme transparency on the use of the funds. This, of course, for both public and private insurers, spells efficiency gains in terms of where and how to use the funding. It also creates the ability to find any leaks of funds in the system, and thereby, directing the funds to where they're really needed. The system is creating data on a massive scale. One of the side effects of actually implementing this system is the major health data that you get on the population, if it's an entire country, or on the people on the platform in a private system. Of course, that has an extreme potential for policymakers, an extreme value for public healthcare. But it also creates, an instant visibility to whether a claim is covered by an insurance or not, and whether who has to pay and who can collect the money. This is where the crossover to the fintech is actually coming into the picture with Osigo, because that actually creates the ability to make a cash out service. processing the claims much faster. I mean, it's actually an instant approval in 99% of all the cases. Then, in principle, within 24 hours, if the cash out service is connected, the health service provider can get the money on their bank account. This is a mega takeaway because normally it would take 60 to 90 days, sometimes even up to 120 days to get this whole system running from claim received to it being processed to the claim actually being paid out to the healthcare provider. So this produces major efficiencies and major benefits for all actors in the sector. It's also pretty interesting because this company, although being Latin America, it's now moving the opposite direction, not from Europe to Latin America, but it has gained a small foothold in Southern Europe. It was the first one to get authorized and in Spain in terms of the electronic health record and the electronic prescriptions. And now this is actually growing, and we're seeing an expansion into Europe with this company. But again, this is an extremely interesting case, a crossover between InsurTech and FinTech, with major benefits both in terms of social impact, the visibility, and some good business on the FinTech side with the cash out services. Next slide, please. Coming to Recarga Pay, which is one of the jewels in the Latin American FinTech industry. It's an extremely exciting case because it's one of the first movers with mobile payments in a huge market like Brazil. In order to understand their precision, you have to understand how payments are normally made in Brazil. You have to envision these long queues that we used to have back in the 80s, every 2 weeks, where we had to go to the bank or the post office to pay our bills, waiting in line, wasting time, and so forth. This is the reality of Brazil today, especially from the lower middle class and the bottom of the pyramid. Waiting in long lines, wasting time, and so forth. Recarga Pay has created this mobile payments platform, starting simply in one place with mobile top-ups, and then moving on, integrating more services, transport, payment of utilities, and so on. This has created an extremely sticky platform once the users are on and get used to using these services. And they have developed a model now where they offer a broader range of financial services and products to the same people, moving towards a full financial service provider in the market. The solution and the products they're bringing to the market on the platform is really hitting a soft spot in the everyday life of the Brazilians. There's a massive transaction volume in that market, and the potential is just huge. With a land and expand strategy, Recarga Pay has actually captured a decent part of it, and they have shown significant growth in terms of active users, monthly active users, and they're getting close to break even. As I said, they're kind of the first movers. And newcomers are actually struggling to do the same thing. It's a lengthy process to integrate all these payment with utility companies, with transport and so forth. It's not something you can do overnight. And you also have to comply with the local regulations, which is a major entry barrier, which Recarga Pay has already overcome. We really feel that this is a company that you need to watch because it might be hitting the list as one of the unicorns to be seen out of Latin America. I'm almost out of time, so I would like to move to the last slide, which is kind of a checkout for me here. As I said, the IDC Ventures is actually setting out now to connect Europe and Latin America. And our third fund in Copenhagen is actually the first manifest of this. And we think that's an interesting bridge between Europe and Latin America for investors and founders to get connected on both sides. When I'm in Latin America, I make the reverse presentation of what I'm talking about today. But it's a de facto bridge, and we are able to coping with the entry barriers, connecting the right people. We have the know-how and the know-who, and we have more than 25 years of experience in doing this. So I'll just finish up. I can see that the timing is running out. I'll just finish up like by inviting you all, founders and investors, to join us on our platform and connect the two continents. I think I'm out of time, Sarah. I can see you also moving out. So okay, I don't know what happened with Sarah here, but these are the last words from IDC Ventures. Again, warm welcome to join on the platform and yeah, connect investors and founders across the continent. I don't know if there's any questions.
All right, Michael. Thomas here from Copenhagen. Thank you so much. That was a very comprehensive and very interesting overview of what's going on in LATAM. I'm gonna move quickly ahead. We're gonna come back to you in 10 minutes, to you and Bobby actually, and I'm gonna do the introduction to that one.